Thank you, Kai, for joining us today. And the floor is yours to tell us more about Bikeshare Toronto.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk to you all a bit more about our program and our system here in Toronto. So my name is Cai de Ridder. I'm a senior planner with Bikeshare Toronto here at the Toronto Parking Authority, which is an agency of the City of Toronto. So we're under the umbrella of the City of Toronto, which is naturally the municipal government here in the city. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about Bikeshare Toronto, some of our history, some of the interesting notes about our organization, why Bikeshare is housed under the Parking Authority, and I'll also give you some information on the title of my presentation, the 4-year growth plan, which is our upcoming master plan. Because it has a lot of interplay with transit here in the City of Toronto, both our local as well as our regional transit agencies. Perfect. So before I get started, I'm just going to share a little bit about the mission of the Toronto Parking Authority and our vision for Bikeshare. So Toronto Parking Authority is a last mile mobility service for the City of Toronto. The largest of our offerings is naturally on and off-street parking facilities that are municipally owned and managed. But we also own the Bikeshare Toronto program, which is where I co-lead capital planning. And our vision for the Bikeshare system is to create a last mile mobility experience that is, convenient and comfortable and sustainable for residents and visitors to the city. And we want to extend that to parking as well. We're also starting to integrate electric vehicle charging into our on-street and off-street portfolio. So we are an agency that is in the process of offering new solutions and new ways to move around the city. So Bikeshare Toronto, this is a little bit of a summary of how our system works. Every Bikeshare program in the world seems to operate a little differently, but ours is a shared fleet of bicycles. I forgot to include that we also have e-bikes in our fleet that are available to residents and visitors for short-term use. We also have an annual membership program that offers 30 and 45-minute trips to users that register, and you can do this through a mobile app that we have. We have a membership card, and we also have kiosks at all of our stations that allow people to purchase passes, or the majority of our stations rather. So we are also a winter city, so I always like to brag that we are a 24/7, 365 program. There are some winter cities in North America that don't offer a year-round program, so we always make sure to let everybody know. This January has actually been surprisingly mild in Toronto, and you may not believe it, but the ridership we've experienced this January is normally what we would experience in April. So although we still always have winter riding, even when it's very, very cold and snowy, this year we've had an exceptionally high winter cycling ridership for our program. So it's always interesting to kind of share that. As I mentioned, we're a docked system, so that means that our bikes must be docked and undocked to a series of stations. They can't just be left on the sidewalk. Our current fleet is about 7,000 bikes, just shy of 700 stations, and we are in 20 of the 25 wards of Toronto. The little map on the bottom, I'll show you much more larger ones for those of you who might not be familiar with our geography, but this is a snapshot of what our system looks like today. Bikeshare originally started in 2011 as Bixi Toronto. It was brought to the city by the same people who started the Bixi Montreal program, which is the Bikeshare system there. It was originally privately managed with a small fleet of 1,000 bikes and 80 stations that were just distributed in downtown Toronto. In 2013, the City of Toronto took over Bixi and rebranded it to Bikeshare Toronto to be a publicly managed system for the city. In 2016, the City of Toronto Transportation Services that had originally been running the program had decided they no longer wanted to be the caretakers of the program. So they offered it to a few agencies and inevitably landed with the Toronto Parking Authority because the Toronto Parking Authority manages a lot of assets on streets similar to our docked stations. So they thought it was a natural fit. The other bonus of being in the Toronto Parking Authority is funding. So that is probably one of the biggest saving graces for our program, is that we do not take taxpayer funding or money. Our system is paid for through our passes as well as parking revenue that we get through the Toronto Parking Authority. In that same year in 2016, it was decided that the Bike Share Toronto program was going to go was going to commence a large expansion. And so they initiated a feasibility study to see which areas of the city would be ideal for a larger system. In 2018, Bike Share Toronto reached 1 million rides that year, which is a huge milestone. In 2021, we introduced e-bikes into our fleet. And in 2022, this was just our last year, we completed the 4-year growth plan, which I'll be showing a bit more about in the latter half of this presentation, which is guiding an even larger expansion since the 2016 one, which completed in 2020. In 2024, which will be next year, we'll have a bike share station in all 25 wards of the city. So it'll officially become a citywide transportation program, which is really, really exciting. And by 2025, we'll have a total of 10,000 bikes and 1,000 stations, which is pretty crazy when you consider it was only about 10 years ago that we had 80 stations and 1,000 bikes. So really, really exciting to see this growth. And in this next slide, I'll show you a bit more about some of the ridership we've had, because it's really, really great. I'm going to talk a little bit more. I already kind of mentioned it, but Bike Share is owned within the Toronto Parking Authority. Like I said, that means our funding is within the parking revenue of the TPA. We also have some Bike Share advertising on our stations, and we also make a small amount of money on our pass sales, which helps us with some of the operations of the system. That's kind of where our pass sales go. The operations of our system, that would be the maintenance of the bikes and the stations, as well as the rebalancing of the bikes to stations that are full and empty, are contracted out to a third party. Currently, our contract is with an organization called Shift Transit, who also operates the MOGO program in Detroit, as well as the bike share system in Chattanooga. Bike Share has occasionally received one-time fundings through grant applications to the federal government here in Canada, as well as Metrolinx, which is the provincial transit agency for the provinces of Ontario. So we've been able to purchase bikes through these grant applications, but again, these are just one-off. They haven't been recurring. The majority of our funding does come through the parking revenue. Given that operations are contracted to a third party, that leaves all the remaining work for Bike Share in the Toronto Parking Authority. So we plan the system, we manage our contracts, we do all the purchasing of equipment, but we also consult the City of Toronto and other stakeholders when we're doing larger master planning assignments to make sure that we can coordinate with other opportunities. As far as policy is concerned, we don't have a ton of policy that's guiding us, other than, following bylaw and standards that apply to everything that's in the right of way in the city. The one thing that we do as a guiding star is a policy called Transform TO. For those that may not be in the know, TO is kind of a fun nickname that people give the City of Toronto. TO, first 2 letters, is also Toronto, Ontario. So everything kind of has a TO at the end of it. Transform TO is a citywide climate action plan. It's a carbon reduction strategy with a lot of goals set to different transportation agencies, including transit. So one of the main objectives for that strategy is to have 75% of school and work trips under 5 kilometers be completed by walking, cycling, or transit by 2030. And so an objective that Bike Share Toronto has under Transform TO is to expand its system, both its e-bike and its traditional bikes, to all over the city, predominantly, or particularly rather, at local subway and LRT stations. So one thing that we're trying to do is have all of our bike share stations, or at least a bike share station, available at each local and regional transit station. So we're going a little bit farther than the Transform TO goal. This is a graph showing some of the ridership of the system since it started in 2011. So again, in 2011, we only had 80 stations and 1,000 bikes, and it was gradually growing until 2016 when the Toronto Parking Authority became the owner of and manager of the system. And since then, we've had really, really exciting growth. It may not be evident, but since 2019, basically, we've had over 1 million new rides in the system since the year before. So last year, we had 4.6 million rides on the Bikeshare Toronto system, which was really, really exciting. And we're really hoping that that momentum continues to grow moving forward. So why are we expanding the bike-share system? Well, the graphs I just showed definitely gave you the impression that the ridership is really, really high, which it is. We have a system that is really, really popular among residents as well as visitors to the city. And we're finally being considered a really, really integral part of the transportation landscape for the city of Toronto. The growth in annual membership and ridership has already exceeded our capacity. We do not have enough docks in the system, which is a good problem to have. That means that we have interest to grow and expand the system. And we've also had a really, really high customer satisfaction rate. We had 92%, and this was taken last August. The popularity of the e-bikes and bikes in our system have really made us realize that we need to offer this to other areas of the city as well. So the majority of our system is located in downtown Toronto. And so we decided through this growth plan that it was time that we offer a system that is available to all of the districts of the city. That it's not just concentrated in the urban downtown core. There are other urban centers of the city that would benefit from it, as well as some more or less dense areas that still have great recreational trails, as well as community trip purposes that could be used by a bike-share system like ours. And so that led us to a program that, or a study rather, that focuses on delivering more choice, ease, and speed to residents across the city of Toronto. So our 4-year growth plan is addressing the future of bike share. We really wanted to focus on a few really important aspects of mobility in the city of Toronto when we were thinking about this program. Those would be, accessibility, equity, and we also wanted to make sure it was convenient and something that would actually encourage ridership. Because it's one thing to place a bike share station in a community. It's another thing to meaningfully integrate a bike share system or station into a community so that it's used. So we really wanted to make sure that the expansion that we were guiding was intentional and backed by data and consultation as well. So we first created a set of really clear goals that would guide both our spatial analysis and our consultation program for expanding the system. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is because I think this is something that's really important for all micromobility systems to keep in mind. Oftentimes, we focus too much on ridership, or we focus too much on integrating with transit. But the thing I've realized with micromobility and bike share is that you really need to provide a diversity of uses for the system. If you only focus on making bike share something as an extension of transit, or just something that's offered to a commercial district of the city, you're really limiting the potential of what it can do and support everybody in your community or your city. We really want to make sure that we had ridership still in there, because obviously that's an important component of our program. We obviously needed to have some degree of revenue, because otherwise we wouldn't have an ROI, and we also need to make sure that we're able to get enough revenue to support the operations of the program. But we also wanted to focus on accessibility. There are areas of the city that currently do not have access to cycling infrastructure, or areas of the city that have been historically underserved by infrastructure investment. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't another program that just neglected those areas. We wanted to integrate with first and last mile. We wanted to extend what public transportation can offer to residents of the city. Toronto is very similar to other North American cities in that it's auto-centric. So we wanted to make it so that transit agencies are able to extend their reach, so to speak, to communities in the city. And we also wanted to focus on equity. So we are a program that advertises as low income. We're about to start an even a low income program that's even cheaper. Our annual memberships are only $100. We're about to offer a low income program that is a fraction of that price to residents that would apply. And so naturally, we need to make sure that the stations are in those neighborhoods so that residents that are newcomers to Toronto or Canada, those that are in low-income households are able to have the service that we're advertising to them. And we really wanted to meaningfully support those communities. And that guided our growth plan. As I mentioned, we also wanted to ensure that we were actually listening to members of the community, not just standing on our high horse and telling people what we think the planning objective for bike share should be. So we hosted a number of stakeholder workshops to ensure that city stakeholders and developers who are also helping us reach our housing goals in the city of Toronto understand the vision for bike share and also can have an impact on how it's expanded. And we also did public consultation to hear from both our users and the general public to see if what we were proposing was something that was actually going to be usable and met what their vision for the program would look like. And that brought us to our spatial analysis. So from those goals and from some of our preliminary engagement, we were able to create a framework for how we were going to expand the system. Again, I think these are really important criteria for agencies to consider when they are creating or expanding their micromobility fleet, be it scooters or bikes. The first is, of course, demand. So this ties directly to that note of ridership and revenue. The next is equity. This was one that is very, very important for us to offer a program that is low income to low income communities. The next is first and last mile. So naturally, that's that integration with transit. And the final is future alignment. And this is tied into the accessibility. We wanted to ensure that we were aligning with upcoming investments in infrastructure and housing and community development. So there are a lot of areas of the city that are under rapid housing construction. We also have areas of the city that have a lot of cycling infrastructure investment, and we wanted to align with those opportunities in particular. So this is kind of a snapshot of our system right now. All of the green dots that you see are bike share station locations in the city. And we've kind of separated the areas into districts of the city. So what says West End, Midtown, Downtown, East End, and Uptown, those are all considered Old Toronto. So those areas of the city already have a fairly dense bike share network that we're able to offer to our users. The other areas of the city, most notably Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough, are slightly more suburban. They have a few urban centers, especially North York, especially where that label is. That's a quite a dense part of the city. But the rest of it is pretty semi-detached suburban neighborhoods, but with some local and regional transit as well. So these were areas that we really wanted to target with our bike share expansion. And what you see before you is the output of our demand assessment. So anything that's shown in dark blue is an area that had a high potential for bike share ridership. Anything in a light blue had a slightly lower, and anything in white was considered lowest priority or potential for the ridership for the system. So we were really, really interested to see where we would be able to align these with other attributes. So naturally, we did other assessments. This one was against equity. So you can see that the areas that are the highest equity priority are actually outside of our existing coverage area. So this was another kind of eye-opener and reminder that we need to embed equity in all of the planning that we do, because to date, the expansion of the system really hasn't prioritized these areas. And while our marketing has advertised a lot of these low-income benefits of the program, we actually aren't in those neighborhoods that really need us the most. So this is, a friendly reminder, you always embed equity in your evaluations when you're planning expansions. So these were areas that we really wanted to focus on in the expansion. This one was the first and last mile transit input. I'm sorry I didn't overlay our subway and upcoming LRT and regional transit lines over this, but these areas that you see in the dark orange are kind of the in-between areas. So these are areas that are over 400 meters away from a higher order transit station or bus rapid transit station, but are within 1,000 or within 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer of that distance. So this is like the ideal cyclable area that would be great for first and last mile. Maybe it was a bit more than 1,000. I can't quite remember. Maybe it was 2 kilometers. But these were areas where there was a high potential for bike share to serve as a great first last mile connection beyond walking. And then finally, this is the future alignment. So everything that you see in dark gray is an area that is either receiving new cycling infrastructure. So this linear line in the middle is called Eglinton Ave. There's also a LRT that's coming online hopefully next year in this area. And there's a lot of development along it as well. So it's kind of like the trifecta of the things we were looking for. There's also here in the northwest corner, this kind of line here, it's called the Finch West. That's also going to get LRT and cycling infrastructure and a lot of development. And then this one in the north, and it comes a little bit to the west, closer to the Scarborough border. That's 2 existing subway lines in North York, Toronto that also have really high density. So we were really excited to see all of these because it kind of meant that our suspicions were right. This is where we kind of wanted to expand, and lo and behold, the data kind of supported our suspicions. So with all of that, we weighted our different variables, created different models, and the final model that we landed on was one that was focused predominantly on future alignment. So those are those upcoming infrastructure investments and equity. We thought the distribution of that was really ideal, and it provided a system that we were really excited to see offer new mobility to new communities. And from that, we refined it a little bit further, and it led us to, I'll show you a map in a sec, but this is kind of the big planning objective that is reached by our growth plan. It'll bring our system to 1,000 stations and 10,000 bikes. It'll bring our system into all 25 wards of the city, prioritizing neighborhoods where the need for affordable mobility options is the highest. It helps us achieve that transform TO goal I was mentioning before by bringing us to many, many more subway and LRT stations than before. I think there will be 138 stations in Toronto by 2025, and we'll be at 101 of those 138 with our bike share stations. And then we're also going to be, well, not included in the mapping, we'll be installing way more e-bike stations that'll allow us to charge e-bikes in our program. So this is the system of 2022, and this is going to be the system of 2025. So you can see the system is predominantly focused in downtown Toronto, or Old Toronto, if you will. And then here we have it expanding much more meaningfully into neighborhoods of the city that are equity deserving, as well as those that are receiving really great cycling infrastructure, so that we can align with those great infrastructure investments. So really, really exciting for this expansion to continue. We started in 2022, so this will be the second year of our annual expansion. But by 2025, it's going to be very, very, very exciting. I kind of highlighted some of these already when I was talking about the maps, but we'll be having a much larger system, so more stations and more bikes. One thing I didn't note, but through our consultation, one of the biggest barriers that was brought up to us was Highway 401. This is this thick line here at the center top of the city. That is the busiest highway in North America. Believe it or not, you can look it up. It has the highest traffic volume of any highway in North America, and it only has 2 crossings for cyclists. There are 2 trail crossings, and we were told by both our public engagement as well as our stakeholder engagement that it is the biggest barrier to cycling in the north of Toronto. So something that we really had to be mindful of, because oftentimes models can't account for this, is the barrier that this presents for people crossing between wards and districts of the city. So we modified our scenario and created kind of breadcrumbs of stations. You can see one here. This is the Dawn Trail. This is one of the multi-use trails that goes under the highway. And then we have another one here on the west end. This is the Humber Trail. So they go along rivers in the city. These are two crossings. So we were trying to, again, maintain that access component of our expansion. The other thing that we wanted to do is first and last mile. Like I said, we'll be at 101 of 138 transit stations by the end of this growth plan, which if you're doing the math, 2030 is when we have to be at all of them. So that only leaves us with 37 more stations to get to in 2026 to 2030. So we're getting really early in meeting that transform TO goal. And then again, the note here on equity, I don't think it says it here, but I believe we will be in 80 or 90% of neighborhoods that have been identified by the city as neighborhood improvement areas. So these are areas that are disproportionately higher in low income families and households, as well as disproportionately higher in newcomer communities. So those are new residents of Toronto or of Canada. So we're really, really excited about getting one step closer to bridging that geographical barrier for equity. And yeah, that's kind of our program expansion in a nutshell. I'm really excited that I was able to tell you a lot about it. I may have focused a little too heavily on our expansion, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the system as a whole, and I'm happy to answer those to the best of my abilities.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Cai, for your presentation.